suppression is a topic that comes up a lot because it's real. It happens. It's happening this year. It's happened historically. It's happened particularly in strong ways in southern states, affecting people of color.
In their red pickup, Richard and Mae Joyce Nickerson, both in their 70s, just drove 35 miles to vote.
It really does not make sense. It's totally inconvenient.
But we had to do it.
They used to drive a few minutes. The Nickersons live outside of Houston in Harris County, home to almost 5 million people, but just one absentee ballot drop-off location.
We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop.
Stop the count! Stop the count! Stop the count!
Hi, I'm Sharon Pratt, host of IPPH On Air. IPPH, the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, housed on the campus of the University of the District of Columbia, with the mission of rediscovering the history of Washington, D.C., while drilling down on touchstone issues of the day, issues that have perennially plagued our nation. And because of the consequential nature of this election cycle, IPPH is hosting a one-month special election series. And so every Monday at 3 p.m., we'll have a live stream of State of Play with our distinguished co-anchors. And then later in the week, as is now, we'll have experts on voter registration, voter disinformation, intelligence, as well as the rules of the House should the election end up before the Congress. And so today we have Pratt Wiley, the former director of the Democratic National Committee's Voter Protection Program, Evelyn Perez Verdia, the statewide advisor for Latino affairs in the great state of Florida. And as well as a special guest, we have Karen Johansson, who is representing the Biden-Harris campaign in Western Pennsylvania, and she'll give us insights of what is going on in the must-win state of Pennsylvania. And so we have Michael Steele, Karen Tramontano, and Mark Thompson to help us understand threats, lies, and trying to vote. Evelyn Perez Verdia, delighted to have you with us. Evelyn is the statewide advisor for Latino affairs in the great state of Florida. Welcome, Evelyn.
Thank you, Mario Pratt. It's not every day that you get to have an interview with a woman who has been a pioneer for many of us as women in politics. So it's a great honor to be with you.
You are also the CEO of Transnational Relations. And can you give us a sense of that?
Well, I've been working with the Latino communities in Florida for over 18 years. It happened by, I guess, a bit of fate and a little bit about circumstances. I was a young student at the University of South Florida who was a part of a work-study program and who wanted to become an ambassador one day. And I didn't have the money because I was the daughter of missionaries in Colombia. So my mentor, who was part of the International Studies program and a professor, showed me that there was a possibility to do an internship program, a legislative internship program. And that started my path in politics, working for a state representative who was was part of the largest district, a large Latino district in Tampa, Florida. And from there, I was asked to be their campaign manager. And from there, I worked with a Congressman Jim Davis, who ran for governor of Florida for 3 years. And then I started my own consulting firm because I saw that there was a need from my own experiences that we needed to teach our communities more about the electoral process, the political process, and the governmental process. I have focused on the state of Florida, and I have worked with different organizations. Our slogan for the company is we believe in good government and good causes. But most important for us, it's just, there's two sides of this story. We need to have the Latino communities understand how politics and government works and the electoral process works, but it's also the cross-cultural piece of also helping other communities understand who we are as Latinos. So those are the two pieces that we usually become a part of with any campaign organization or entity who wants to engage in a better way, in a more sincere way with the communities.
Now, as you provide advice to the Latino community primarily, especially targeting the state of Florida, we understand that the Latino community is not a monolith. Could you give us sort of a sense of the various components and elements within the Latino community?
Yes, actually, that is correct, Mayor. The Latino vote is not a monolith. We have 2.3 million Latinos registered to vote in this 2020 election. And within Florida, aside from those registered to vote, we have over 1.2 Cuban Americans that live in Florida. We have over 1.2 Puerto Ricans who live in Florida. Then the third largest population is around 800,000 Mexicans. And then the fourth largest population are Colombian Americans like me, who are around 400,000 that are here in Florida, in addition to all the different communities and all from all different countries that live in Florida that are from Latin American countries.
Now, for many of us, as we watched President Trump descend the escalator, really, deriding immigrants and especially Mexican Americans, from afar, we'd say, well, how on earth could he win any portion of the Latino vote? And yet he won Florida in 2016. Could you sort of explain that and elaborate upon that?
Sure. It's interesting because when you look at the numbers right now in Florida, if you look at the numbers in total, the percentage of Latinos who favor Biden right now, and 51% is the Latino community in Quinnipiac poll, and 40% is Trump. When you ask them if they think Trump is a racist, 54% of the Latinos say that he is. There's also an ICR Ads Mobile poll, which shows that 51% of the Latinos in Florida favor Biden, Vice President Biden, and 37% favor President Trump. But, there's something really fascinating because, like you said, the Cuban American vote, we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm for the younger generations of the Cuban Americans who are Democrats, or, Venezuelan Americans of different ages. Mm-hmm. But it's because they see, let's say in the Venezuelan American vote, one of the things they see a president right now that many say that reminds them of Hugo Chavez. And why do they say that? They say it's because they see a president that violates the Hatch Act and has a campaign event at the White House. They see a president that calls the media the enemy of the people. They interestingly contacted me, a lot of the Venezuelan members of these communities, and they said, you know what, when they saw the debate, they said that it just reminded them of Hugo Chavez, just that he was speaking in English. So I think that these encounters that we see with the president, and when you said him going down the stairs, I think for some, they see it. But we also have to understand, Mayor, that we come from countries where racism also exists. And sometimes for the people in our own countries, it's something that we don't want to talk about. But that racism that they also feel inside for our communities of color is justified by what the president says. And it's something a lot of people don't want to talk about, but it's sincere, and we have to have a conversation about it.
You have been particularly outspoken about disinformation campaigns targeting the Latino community in Florida, and you even believe that it's coordinated. Could you explain that?
Well, actually, right now, what we are seeing and what from the research that has been done, we have seen FBI Director Wray say that there has been a massive disinformation campaign to denigrate the vice president. Now, what he did not say is in which languages this is happening. And one of the research that we're seeing from different journalists, because this has been really a serious work from various journalists, international and national. I just had a journalist from Japan where I spent 3 hours showing them the WhatsApp disinformation that we're seeing. And just to see that motivation to teach the communities, hey, beware of this. But, Representative Joaquin Castro of Texas and Representative Debbie Murkowski-Powell of Florida have actually asked the FBI to investigate this further, because we are seeing foreign actors, but we need to know where they're coming from. Is it just Russia? Why are we seeing it in Spanish? We're also seeing information in Arabic and in English and Russian. So it's scary. And as a Colombian American, one of the things that we're also seeing is Colombian elected officials interfering in the elections in Florida and in the United States, supporting the President Trump.
There's some who suggest that Vice President Biden could be ahead by 5 percentage points. But, do you believe that? Do you believe that Vice President Biden can win the state of Florida?
Well, I have to say, Mayor, that we are seeing in the polls also senior citizens starting to come closer and to support the Vice President Biden, just because we have had a president who has been, I guess, dismissive to our senior citizens of, within the middle of this pandemic. And I think that, when we look at lives and we look at over 210,000, people in the United States who have passed away, and to act like it's nothing, I think that we as voters, we take concern about that. And we realize that there's an importance to bring decency back into the White House. So I'm assuming, and I believe that it's really right now nationally, the Vice President Biden is 11 points up. In Florida, he's 5%. But I think that here it's going to be of the voters to take the chance to go out and vote, to not wait till the last minute, and to think, no matter what the polls say, that we have to work on this as if we were 10 points down till the last day.
Well, Evelyn, Perez, Verdia, you've been terrific. Your insights have been incredible. And I think our audience now has a better sense of what to watch for in the great state of Florida. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mayor Pratt. And I really can't, no matter what political ideology people are watching this, I think what's important is the message is we need to go out and vote. We need to show that we are part of this system, and we need to continue to bring those democratic values into our nation and keep them strong. So thank you so much, Mayor Pratt, for this invitation.
Pratt Wiley, we are delighted to have you, the CEO of the partnership, as well as the former director of voter protection for the Democratic National Committee. If anybody can talk to us about the issue of voter suppression, it's Pratt Wiley. Thank you for being with us, Pratt.
It's a joy to be here.
Well, we're delighted. So you dealt a lot with at least issues around voter suppression in 2016. Was there a lot of it? And if so, did it have an impact?
Certainly there was a lot. And what we have seen over really the last 10 years, since 2010, when the Tea Party and the Republicans took control of state legislatures, is a real concerted effort to make it more difficult for citizens across the board to vote, whether that is women, whether it is people of color, whether it's young people, whether it's seniors. Each of these demographics had something in common. Each and every one of them was a key pillar of the Obama coalition, certainly in 2010, and they continue to be key pillars of the Democratic coalition. But they also represent the majority of Americans. And what we saw in 2016 was a change, certainly in some of the tactics that were used, but the underlying strategy of trying to make it harder for more people to vote absolutely exists in 2016.
Well, let me just ask you, you're saying that Republicans are the ones who engage in voter suppression for prospective Democratic voters. I'm certain they would say that Democrats are equally difficult and aggressive with potential Republican voters. Would that not be the case?
That really actually isn't the case. What you actually find is nationally, you have two groups that really define the way that this works politically. The vast majority of professionals, myself, academics, election administrators, the folks who look at elections day in and day out, there really is broad consensus that we can use technology and best practices to make our elections safer and make them easier and more convenient for citizens to participate.
So therefore, you would say something like what Governor Abbott tried to do, I guess, although the courts overruled him, I think, where he tried to limit the number of voting drop-off points for absentee ballots to 1 per county. Is that voter suppression?
That's absolutely voter suppression. Because what you see on the other side, this is the dynamic that's at play on the other side. On one side, you have professionals where there's great consensus in terms of what can be done. What actually is done, that changes. But then on the other side, what you have is really, it's a group of Republicans, and we need to be able to call this out in order to understand what is going on here. You need to understand the partisan dynamic that is driving all of this. And what Republicans believe is that when fewer people vote, they win more elections. And you don't need to take my word for this. You can look at what they themselves say, that whether it is trying to
the mail, yeah, I don't mean to cut across, but the mail issue. I mean, even I noticed that my mail is slower. And all of what DeJoy is doing to change operations as we look to have an unprecedented year for mail-in ballots. But they do argue, and I'm asking you, is there any legitimacy to the argument that they feel that just universal invitation to mail-in ballots potentially is very susceptible to fraud?
No. There's no evidence that mail ballots are more susceptible to fraud. What we actually see is that fraud is incredibly rare in our elections. A study that was done about 5 years ago now, but it's still one of the best, most in-depth studies, looked at about 1 billion votes that had been cast. There were 31 instances of demonstrated fraud in that instance. You need to understand that you're more likely to be bitten by a shark and then have a vending machine land on you than you are to actually have voter fraud in an election.
But they're filing a suit in California. I mean, there's no way that Republicans will win California. How can they afford to even spend the money to challenge the governor of California for having a universal invitation to do mail-in ballots? I don't get the strategy of that.
Well, if I were a better political strategist, we'd be right now working on Hillary Clinton's reelection rather than trying to defeat Donald Trump. Overall, we need to recognize that these election systems are run by the states, and that oftentimes what is being experimented in one state in a particular election is a policy or a practice that can then be adopted by other states in following years. And so California is very much on the vanguard in terms of making their elections more accessible and easier and more convenient and safer. And that if I were they, I'd be trying to stop that too. If I did not have confidence in my ability to win the election in the ballot box, then I would absolutely follow the Republican strategy of trying to stop what's occurring in California or Colorado or other states that
Should I be nervous about violence on election day? I mean, do you think that it would ever, there's what is it called? The National Ballot Security Task Force that was on display in Trenton in this election cycle, trying to convince people that they didn't really qualify, they needed to go, they couldn't come and really cast their ballot, and they've had success. Will that happen, particularly since there's been a sort of a invitation for 50,000 poll watchers, some of whom were ex-Navy SEALs? I mean, are you fearful of that kind of dynamic on election day?
I am, and it's something that has increased dramatically since Donald Trump started running for office. I think that what we have seen are a number of organizations, and I'm less worried about necessarily folks who in and of themselves are former military being poll observers. And poll observers in and of themselves are not a form of intimidation. It's actually the Democratic Party will have poll observers at many of the polling locations, so will the Republican Party. It's part of our process. But what Trump has invited are extrajudicial observers, and these are folks who do need to be watched. Many of them come from white supremacist groups. It's something that the Southern Poverty Law Center has been warning about for years. Many of them aren't going to adhere to the rules and to the regulations of ensuring that our democracy is transparent and fair, and rather our intent to intimidate voters and to hopefully influence an election in a way that their ideas, their policies, and their interests just cannot.
Well, both sides are lawyering up. So that means that both sides fear that they're going to turn this, even if there's a historic turnout, this into a contested election, because there are going to be concerns or argument that there was voter fraud by mail-in ballots, etc. Are you really worried about that we are really headed for a contested election because of potentially voter intimidation?
I think that it's something that we need to be prepared for. Whether or not we ultimately need to rely upon all those lawyers and the court systems in order to ensure that this is a fair, free, and election, that ultimately is in the hands of the voters. The lawyers will be there to make sure that the voters are able to exercise every right that they are entitled to, and that every voice is heard. And then if it does end up in the courts, I think that quite honestly, our lawyers have been fighting these issues and are much better versed in both the principles of law and the principles of democracy, and that we will have a much different outcome than we did certainly in 2000, which was the last time that we had an election, a national election that ended up in our court systems.
Well, I'm glad you feel that comfort. I mean, I think everybody is heartened to hear it. Because part of the concern is that President Trump indicated he wanted to get this nomination through so that he'd have another person on the Supreme Court. That would give him 3 appointments. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll vote the party line, but that potentially is 6 votes on the Supreme Court. So, I mean, can we count on, a fair outcome or, a dispassionate ruling?
I think we need to understand, I think you're absolutely right, Mayor, that the president does not want a fair election. I think it is entirely, we have to take his word at it at this point. He does not want a fair election. He does not trust the American public to keep him in power. And I think rightly so. I think he has demonstrated why the American people are just and wise in seeking to remove him from office through the ballot box. And he's desperate. And we don't know how he is going to respond. And so we do need to be prepared for every contingency. But what I draw confidence in is that my successors, both at the party and on the campaigns and in the vast voting rights community, have been focused very much on these issues, and they will be prepared. I'm very confident that the justice system actually will be able to exert itself in this process. I draw a lot of confidence, quite honestly, in the fact that we saw something absolutely terrifying in Michigan, which really amounts to a coup attempt against Governor Whitmer, and that the federal government and the FBI were the ones who were able to stop that. I think our law enforcement, I think our institutions, this is a moment where, again, they will be tested just as they've been tested over the last 4 years, but between that and quite honestly, the partisan support that they can get in an election, there is a path where we don't see these worst case scenarios that are being telegraphed right now by Trump.
Well, this has been encouraging. This is a much more hopeful assessment about, one, our institutions of law enforcement, our democratic institutions that should always stand above partisan politics, that they will survive, that they will prevail in November of 2020. So we can't thank you enough, Pratt Wiley. You have been wonderful. You have wonderfully insightful. So on behalf of IPPH on Air, thank you so very much.
Thank you, guys. Make sure you guys vote November 3rd.
IPPH, the Institute of Politics, Policy and History, housed on the campus of the University of the District of Columbia, with the mission of rediscovering the history of Washington, D.C., while drilling down on touchstone issues of the day, issues that have perennially plagued our nation. And because of the consequential nature of this election cycle, IPPH on Air is hosting a special election series for 1 month. And so each Monday through November the 16th at 3 p.m. or thereabouts, you will see the live stream State of Play with essentially the same distinguished co-anchors of today. And then later in the week, we will host podcasts featuring experts in voter registration, voter disinformation, intelligence, or even the rules of the House should this election end up before the Congress. But before I reintroduce our distinguished co-anchors, because we're on the eve of the election, we want to bring you an up-to-date report from a battleground state, the great state of Pennsylvania. And we are very lucky to have Karen Johansson with us today. She was the executive director of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. She was also the campaign manager of Senator Tammy Baldwin, and she is now with the Biden-Harris campaign, focused particularly on the western arm of Pennsylvania. Thank you so very much, Karen Johansson, for being with us today.
Mayor, it's a great pleasure to be here. I should say I live 1 block from UDC when I'm not here in Pennsylvania, so it's especially wonderful to be with you.
It's great of you to be here. And, Pennsylvania is viewed to be a critical state. Is it still the critical must-win state?
I think so. I think, there were 4 states, big states that we lost. I'm saying we as a Democrat: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Florida. Now, I think Florida is a tough climb, but if we win the other 3, Joe Biden will become president. Obviously, if you take Pennsylvania's 20 electoral votes away, you've got to replace those. And that's not as easy as, there's so many states in play. And if you win something to replace Pennsylvania, fine, but there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. So Pennsylvania is extremely important.
So what region of Pennsylvania do you think will determine the outcome of the election for Pennsylvania?
Well, that's a hard question. There's so many, the city of Philadelphia is essential to keep the turnout up. The 21% of the vote in the collar counties around Philadelphia are very important. Where I am in the West is in Allegheny County, which is a blue county, getting our turnout out up here, but it's nothing in Pittsburgh like Philadelphia. And then there's the other thing, which is not lose by as much in these other counties as Hillary Clinton did. Barack Obama won the state of Pennsylvania by getting about 36% in those red counties. She got about 26%. She got 89% of the Black vote in Philadelphia. He got 98%. Now, getting 98% of anything is a pretty tall order, but that's why she underperformed there. So that's to say there's not one single place that is totally essential. You can't just bump the turnout up in Philadelphia and ignore the other parts of the state.
So let me ask you sort of one last question, because I know you're in the middle of an election and the election is tomorrow. But given the massive turnout, is there still any chance that the state legislature, as many have speculated, might intercede, abort the tabulation of the mail-in ballot and even go so far as to offering an alternative slate of electors?
Well, there's many hurdles here. Number one is the number of absentee ballots. The state reformed the election process to allow people to vote by mail with no excuse. They had never had that before. So you have millions of people who sent in their ballot, but they didn't reform the system of counting them. So you cannot begin to count them until 7 a.m. on election day. Some of the counties will start right then. Some are not going to start counting the absentee ballots till after the polls have closed. So we're really not going to know what happened. There was a court ruling. The Republicans tried to prevent any ballot received after election day, but postmarked by election day, not to be counted. But now they have until Friday. But those votes will be segregated and probably be the subject of a court suit. There's been noise about the Republican-controlled legislature appointing their own electors, although most of the legislative leaders said they weren't going to do that. Who knows what it's going to be like December 14th when all the electors are supposed to gather and vote for their state's nominee. So
it's hard to know. Well,
it's hard to know.
Yeah, well, it's a very busy time. I know it's very intense for you, and we really, really appreciate your taking the time. So Karen Johansson, thank you very much. And IPPH On Air is very grateful, and good luck and stay safe.
Well, I'm going right back outside. It's freezing today, and launch some more canvassers. I'm inside a supporter's house, and she asked me to wear a mask. So that's what I'm doing.
That's what we all got to do.
But thank you very much, Mayor. It was an honor to be with you.
Well, it was our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And now we're going to introduce our distinguished co-anchors. And we begin with Michael Steele. Michael Steele was the former chairman of the Republican National Committee. He is an MSNBC political analyst, and he is also the co-chair of the Senior Advisory Committee for IPPH. Welcome, Michael.
Good to be with you, Mayor.
Karen Tramontano, who was the former Deputy Chief of Staff for President William Jefferson Clinton. She's an international political analyst, and she's also co-chair of the Senior Advisory Committee of IPPH.
Thank you, Mayor. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. And Reverend Mark Thompson. Mark is the host of the podcast Make It Plain. He's also a regular on MSNBC and a distinguished member of the IPPH Senior Advisory Committee. Mark, are you with us here?
I am with you. Good afternoon.
Well, great to have you. So, delighted that all of you are with us and on this momentous occasion, a day before the election, with the incredible voter turnout. Is there any chance whatsoever that a foreign player, such as Russia or Iran or China, could possibly influence the outcome of this election? Michael, what do you think?
Absolutely. In fact, an alert was just put out on air about an hour ago, just reminding folks that this is a real possibility, that the time immediately before the election and immediately after the election is when our system is potentially vulnerable to attack from foreign adversaries that include Russia, Iran, China, and others. So there is no doubt about that. We can't take any of that lightly. 2016 stands out in stark relief of what we could be in for, because we already know that these actors are out there and capable of engaging in our elections. So we're looking to our secretaries of state. We're looking to the way our system is structured with 50 individual federal elections, if you will, makes it much more difficult, but doesn't mean that they won't try.
No, absolutely. 51, don't forget the District of Columbia.
Yeah, absolutely, 51.
Karen, what do you think? Do you think there's any chance of interference from a foreign player?
Yes, I agree with Michael. I mean, I think the time for that interference is at the beginning of the election process with misinformation, as they did in 2016, discouraging people to vote for various reasons, analyzing information as to how to put those messages out and which constituencies to reach with different messages, to just dim the vote. As Pratt Wiley was saying in your interview of him, getting that vote down helps Republicans. And so foreign adversaries like Russia in 2016 tried to accomplish that, and the vote was down. So it had an impact. I mean, with the huge turnout, I think we could say they're not as effective as they were in 2016, but I really worry about their second point of leverage, which is after tomorrow, and putting out information that jeopardizes the integrity of the election, and just ringing that bell and sounding that note over and over and over again. And unfortunately, our president is doing that, and foreign actors are echoing that. And that's my biggest concern right now, that the integrity of this election will be jeopardized.
Yeah. How about you, Mark?
Well, sounds like somebody's outside my window with a loudspeaker encouraging people to get out to vote. So that's a good thing, I guess. Sorry for the interference. But I think we're already seeing it quite obviously. It can get worse. We're seeing it in the targeted disinformation and suppression, especially as that targets African Americans and African American men. And we have, in the words of Malcolm Nance, someone who fits the description of an unwitting agent, at least in the White House, who is fomenting destabilization. Because I think we have to be clear, Putin's goal is ultimately destabilization. It's not simply getting a figure he wants in the White House, but to destabilize this country, destabilize the European countries, NATO, and what have you. So we know most states, the majority of them, count their mail-in ballots the day of and in the days after. That's why certification doesn't take place at midnight all over the country on election night. So when he says, we've got to stop the counts, these mail-in ballots are fraudulent, he's already planting the seeds of doubt and fomenting destabilization with his own words. So he's doing that bidding. If Russia has something more aggressive planned, unlike the Obama White House that tried to prevent that from happening 4 years ago, this White House will probably just let it go forward. So I think we have to be very, very concerned.
Mayor, can I jump?
Go ahead, Michael.
Can I jump on that real quick? Because I don't want people to lose what Mark is saying, because it is critically important to the psychology that's being played out right now, right, and the messaging that's being played out right now. Listen to what Donald Trump and his ilk, and that's the polite way to put it, are telling us, that the only way Donald Trump loses this election is if there is fraud. Think about that. The only way he loses is if there's fraud. No, Donald Trump, the only way you lose is when the American people vote you out of office. That's how you lose an election in this country. It's when you are voted out. But their narrative is one that tells us that the only way he loses is if they're fraud. The only way Joe Biden wins is if there is fraud. That is counter to everything we know to be true about our system, even with interference. This is the same man who complained about winning his election in 2016. So I think we really need to listen to what Mark is saying here about what is the messaging and the motivations involved here, because he's trying to punk us on something very fundamental. He's trying to dupe us into believing something that goes against everything we already know to be true. So I really don't want people to lose sight of that. Donald Trump, if he loses tomorrow night, is because we, the people, will have unelected him. not because of some fraud, not because of vote by mail, not because of absentee ballots, but because the American people, when this election is certified, will have unelected him.
Well, let me do a follow-up, because again, this massive turnout, is there a chance for mischief by institutional players? Now, some have suggested the president, but state and local officials, including federal officials. Is there an opportunity for real mischief, just overlooking the popular vote? Karen?
Well, I think we're already seeing it, right? I mean, and you have the Republican Party that went into state court where they lost to challenge almost 200,000 votes. And so now they're going into federal court. So we could have the federal judiciary playing an oversized role right now, especially because of the distribution of the judges currently, with President Trump having packed a lot of these, excuse my language here, but having packed a lot of the federal courts. Right now, we have the Supreme Court that, Roberts has been able to convince his fellow jurists to affirm state law, and state courts not affirm federal courts. But you could have the judiciary playing an oversized, very detrimental role in this. The Postmaster General, the Inspector General for the Postmaster General, has found lost ballots. You have ballots, mail-in ballots in storage facilities. Anybody can. This is unprecedented in terms of the number of people who have voted by mail. And a lot of these states and boards of elections are not even ready for a security point of view to protect these ballots. So, I think there's a lot of danger out there, and we've got to really, really stay focused on the fight.
Well, Mark, I'm going to ask you the same question, but at the same time, I'm going to ask you this. Mm-hmm. Given all of this upheaval, is there a chance for violence tomorrow? Mark?
I think, unfortunately, there is. I was just in downtown in Lower Manhattan a little while ago, and all of the windows that are boarded up, people are getting ready. People are nervous. Yes, there is. We've seen some of Trump supporters even try to run Biden's buses off the road. I think we have to be very, very concerned about this. And again, that's part of the destabilization agenda, is to create, as Michael said, a level of anxiety and fear. And prayerfully, that will not scare people away from the polls, because that happens too. People feel if there's something that's going to be happening to them, then they may not go vote. I hope that's not the case. I hope people actually have the courage to do that tomorrow. So yeah, I think we have to be concerned about that. Real quickly though, Karen said, excuse me, when she used the word when she shouldn't have. She said packed. She used packed in the proper context. When the mainstream media asked Biden and Harris, are you going to pack the court, when they have never referred to what Trump and McConnell have done as court packing, is completely inappropriate. They are the ones that have packed the federal judiciary over these many years with over 200 some odd unqualified judges. So I think that in terms of institutional players, to your original question, we have to watch the court. I think that there's some votes on the Supreme Court that would be more than happy to invalidate mail-in ballot counting beyond midnight on Tuesday, November 3rd. But here's the irony, and just how desperate they are for destabilization. Many Republicans vote mail-in ballots, including 7 significant counties in Pennsylvania. So are you going to cut their votes off? And I think that his own constituency needs to realize that he does not even act in their own best interests. He doesn't care about them and their votes.
That's what's so dumb about what members of my party are doing. As someone who I learned the art of politics growing up in Washington, D.C. from the likes of David Clark, Joe Yeldell, Marion Barry, And especially Marion Barry always taught me as a Republican. I was a Republican at the time, so he had sympathy on me, but he taught me some of the tricks of the trade, which was learn to work your vote and learn to turn that vote out. And how you do that is by all means necessary and available. So that means getting them to the polls, getting ballots in their hands if they're living in assisted living facilities. You turn that vote out. So that is a lesson that Republicans, and certainly that I know to be true, because we have used it, Mayor. What Mark is saying is so incredibly true, and which is why what the Republicans are allowing Donald Trump to do right now is so short-sighted and so stupid, because those ballots that they are trying to challenge, those ballots that they're trying to throw out have Republican senators running for re-election. Hello, they have Republican senators who are in tight races in Colorado and Nevada and Georgia and North Carolina, right? And they're looking to throw those ballots out. Well, guess what's going to happen? That's a recipe for them to lose those seats that they need. Mitch McConnell is not crazy about this idea, trust me, of Donald Trump challenging all of these ballots, because he knows those down ballot Republicans will also lose those races potentially, because those ballots won't get counted. They won't get counted.
What are your concerns? Are you concerned about violence tomorrow, Michael?
Oh, absolutely, I am. And we've already seen it, as Mark referenced, with the Biden bus and the videos out there online being challenged by these numbnuts driving up on the bus, slowing the bus down. So yeah, Trump's team, a lot of his people have fomented this nonsensical violence. This is the first election where we're actually worried about people taking up arms against neighbor and friends over who they voted for. We've never had that. At the worst point, lowest point in the 1960s, in the 68, challenges and the riots of 68, no one worried about attacking folks at polling places on election day. I mean, so this idea that's being fomented by this president is dangerous. It is anti-American. It is certainly anti-voter rights and representation. And so my hope is, and I agree with both Karen and Mark, that voters will stand up and they will stand proud and they will vote and they will not instigate and they will not foment and play into this violence. And so that's my prayer for tomorrow. But yeah, there are elements out there, Mayor, who would very much want to see this thing go off the rails so that they can then point fingers and go, see, that's why those ballots need to be invalidated. See, that's why the votes in that Democratic precinct need to be discounted. And that shouldn't be what we do.
Well, Karen, I'm going to ask you the same question, but a second one as well. Are you concerned about violence tomorrow? And also, what two states do you think we need to focus upon?
So, like Michael and Mark have said, I'm very concerned. If Trump loses, I'm very concerned that there will be violence. And, he's been tweeting and applauding the violent and aggressive tactics of people. So on his team, the city, as you know, right now is a ghost town. I mean, everything's boarded up. And that just sort of feeds on itself too. So I'm concerned about the way we look. We're prepared for it, and it just sort of invites it. And I am being very prayerful along with Michael. In terms of states, I'm looking at North Carolina and Georgia, and not because they're pivotal, but I think I'm keeping my eye on a couple of the early states, because those are states that the president really needs. And if we see a Biden victory or, even a slim margin, and those are two states that the president won by a significant margin, I think that's going to, sort of give us a guide as to what's going to happen the rest of the day and the rest of the evening and maybe the next couple of days. So Georgia and North Carolina is where I'm going to stay focused. Yeah.
Okay, Mark, quickly, what are two would you say we should focus on?
My two are probably three: Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I think if Biden wins those, he's in pretty good shape. Who knows what's going to happen in Florida? I don't know that we should get our hopes up about Florida being resolved unless, Biden just runs away with it. And if that happens, it's an early night. I think we're in for a surprise in Texas. And frankly, just quickly, aside from the presidency, if Mike Espy is close, Mike Espy is doing better than Amy McGrath in Kentucky. If there were a way for Mike Espy to squeak out a win in Mississippi, to get the first black senator from Mississippi since Reconstruction, that would be as historically significant as electing the first black president. He's got a shot, and he may surprise us too.
How about you, Michael? What are the two?
My two would be, I would agree with Karen on Georgia. Georgia is an interesting play, both for the presidential as well as the two Senate seats that are up and available there. The Republicans will not get a majority of those two seats. In fact, I think the Democrats are better positioned to take one or both of those seats, which would be huge from all kinds of levels. And my second state is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania for the Biden team is very, very important, particularly if you discount Florida and give the president an advantage in Florida, which sort of historically is where that lies. Pennsylvania becomes important of the three states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And I think watching that would be very, very important to see how the night goes. To Mark's point, if Vice President Biden wins Florida, y'all just, pop the corks and take the night off because it doesn't matter what happens after that. But absent that, I think Georgia and Pennsylvania for me are going to be fun to watch because the potential upside for a broader margin for Vice President Biden, who I think will win regardless, I think is there.
So your thinking is Biden will win the election?
I believe all the indices are there. This is not 2016, despite what a lot of people are kind of saying about hidden votes and pockets here and there. I think given the fact that 93 million Americans have already voted in this election, that you're still going to have a significant turnout of Democrats and Republicans on election day. And I'm not buying this notion that every newly registered Republican is voting for Donald Trump, as a lot of Republicans are pushing out there. I'm a Republican who voted for Biden. I just think that the vice president is well positioned, but it is a big caution given what we were talking about before about how certain state actors may try to manipulate on behalf of the president and certain foreign actors may try to do the same.
Karen, I'm going to ask you the same question in spite of the fact we see President Trump moving ahead in Iowa. Some polls suggest he's moved ahead in Florida. What is your thinking on tomorrow? Who will win this election?
Well, I think Biden is still well positioned. The polls have, there is this outlier poll by a very reputable firm in Iowa that puts President Trump up 7 points. And that's a huge spread.
Yeah.
So I must say that gave me some pause. The question which Michael raised is, are there voters out there? Is there movement around independence? Are there people that, haven't voted before? And that's where that hidden margin is. I don't think it's 7 points. There may be some movement, but I think Vice President Biden is got enough of a margin himself in those states to protect against the loss. So I do think Vice President Biden pulls it out tomorrow.
And Mark, ask you the same. Do you think Biden wins, even though there have been a number of expressed concern that the voter turnout among African Americans in a few battleground states is still not as strong as they had hoped? What is your thinking?
I think, as Karen has said, the polling margins are big enough to be outside of the threshold of chaos. I think when Hillary Clinton ran, when it was tighter, that creates more room for chaos and mischief and some hiccups in some states. But he's polling well, and in some states even more than 5%. So I think that will protect him. Again, very cautious about that because we all have PTSD from some of us still have from 2000 and even before then. But I think it looks very, very good. And there's a lot of belief and optimism out there. We pray that it comes so because I don't think the nation's morale could stand it if it were to go the other way and Donald Trump were to be reelected.
Thank you, Michael Steele, Karen Tramontano, and Mark Thompson. And also thank you to our special guest, Karen Johansson, as well as Pratt Wiley, former director of the Democratic National Committee's Voter Protection Program, as well as Evelyn Perez Verdia, the statewide coordinator for Latino affairs in the great state of Florida. And thank you also to our IPPH on-air audience. If you want to follow us, you can at Instagram and Facebook at Politics Policy History or Twitter at Politics Policy One. So stay safe, and we'll see you next Monday.